Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Revolution Podcasted. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Annie.
I'm Patrice.
And I'm Pavan. Today we're going to focus on the question of what are legitimate ways of affecting political change.
Alright, so I want to kick us off by first looking at some of the reasons for political change. Like, what is it that makes people wake up and say, hey, let's change our entire system of government?
Well, first looking at the American Revolution, which began after the French and Indian War when British debts needed to be settled. The British began to tax the colonists in order to pay their debts. I'd say that some colonists saw these taxes as unfair and began to rally for political change.
Totally, I see what you're saying, but I think you can go even bigger. If you look at both the American and French revolutions, you'd see that the common people felt as though they were suppressed by the government. And more specifically to the French Revolution, the people wanted to limit the power of the Catholic Church. When the majority of power in decision making is held by the government or any large entity, the people have no other way to make changes than by revolution.
Exactly. For example, the fact that there was a monarchy in Britain played a role. The colonists were not in favor of a country overseas making decisions for them, like you said. The people felt suppressed. Do you think that the cause of the French Revolution was any different than the American Revolution?
I would say the reasons for both revolutions are similar, but aren't necessarily the same. I think they were both because of the oppression of people, the absence of freedom, and the existence of inequality.
I'd also agree that the causes were similar for both revolutions, but how they played out for each state were totally different.
Yeah, if you look at the American Revolution, American colonists were outraged at the harsh taxes imposed on America, and they sided on in British Parliament, while in France, the revolution was prompted by the annoyance of tax burden on the Third Estate.
I wouldn't say that was the sole cause of the revolution in France. Citizens were also being deprived of food, whereas the nobility were gorging themselves and evading taxation. I think it's the deprivation of a basic right that everyone should be entitled to that's the common link between both of these revolutions and all others.
Before we move on, I want to add that it is also important to note that the revolutions and the acts that lead up to revolting are generally not out of the blue. Many times the crowds attempt other ways of accomplishing goals, which end up being ignored, and then revolts are the last resort.
I like that last point you made. In revolutions, you often see philosophers quoted or opinion papers formed. I just want to know, what's everyone's thoughts regarding the role that both literature and philosophy play in revolutions?
I think literature and philosophy has a huge impact on political change. It creates political awareness among the middle class and lower socioeconomic classes. In fact, we are still seeing the political effects of the philosophy and literature of both the French and American Revolution in modern politics today.
I like your point about how this is a way for the middle and the lower classes to become aware of their surroundings. I think that they both serve as outlets for people to channel their thoughts and beliefs into a single document. I think that writers are really able to get a pulse on the citizens and represent their ideas in an eloquent and powerful way. It carries a lot of weight.
It's so true. In the revolutions in New York City, I played a character who was a woman and a member of the crowd. The writings of John Locke allowed my character to make informed arguments. Without this article, my character would not be able to come up with evidence-based arguments for women's rights. In the French Revolution game, I played an indeterminate and needed to be swayed by rhetoric. The other delegates cited arguments from Rousseau, Sieyès, and other political philosophers in order to change my vote in favor of them.
These writings allowed the colonists to share one common agenda because they were all familiar with Locke and his stances on tacit consent, taxation without representation, and property. Other writers like Thomas Paine also forced readers to question and ultimately oppose the British power and regime. Similarly, in France, the Rousseau's social contract rhetorical approach was to persuade and inspire revolution. Other factions turned to different sources in order to support their claims. For example, the Jacobins relied on Rousseau, while the conservatives turned to Burke.
Yes, not all literary works have the same viewpoint. Since you brought up Rousseau's social contract, I particularly liked it because it provided insight to the idea of corruption in monarchy. For example, Rousseau explains, to renounce freedom is to renounce one's humanity, one's rights as a man, and equally one's duties. I think that it's hard to recognize faults of the government since that's the only thing you know. As a conservative in France, I can say that literary works such as A Social Contract, brought up by other factions, offer an outside perspective that one may not have considered.
Oh, Tom in the back says there's a call on the line. Hey, welcome to the show.
Hey everyone, super happy to be on the show. I just wanted to say that I think it's not that important what the medium is. It isn't just literature that plays the important role, but any mode of communication. I think it's the rhetoric that people latch onto, and not so much the medium it's conveyed through.
For sure. Nowadays, we have social media, television, blogs, and other modes of communication that people are able to stay informed from. But I do have to disagree that the medium doesn't matter. You change your rhetoric based on what the medium you're using. Since our podcast is audio only, we can't incorporate visuals, so we use sounds. How we convey the rhetoric is heavily dependent on the medium.
Thanks for calling. We have to keep going.
No problem. Thanks for having me on.
So far, we've hit on why we think revolutions start and the role philosophy and literature play in them. I think we can all agree that the peaceful mode of literature definitely impacts. But what about the violent acts like the mob?
I believe that acts of violence specifically for the purpose of a revolution are most of the time with a good intent. The need for a change sometimes can only happen by someone standing up and speaking out against the establishment in place, which is why revolutions are crucial turning points in history.
No, I don't know if acts of violence always have good intent. I think acts of violence are effective in forcing one side to do something in favor of the other side, but they're not effective in changing someone's views. I do feel sometimes that mobbing was necessary because it gave people a voice who could not vote.
I have a mixed opinion on violence's place in revolutions. I don't believe that violence is effective in changing people's ideas. If anything, it solidifies them. I know that from our revolution in New York City, the mob's use of violence only solidified our ideas of the lawlessness that they represented, especially as a loyalist. If anything, the mob's violent actions just gave the Patriots less credibility as they supported them.
Yes, while the mob in the American Revolution was successful in changing and influencing events and characters in the revolution, I would agree that violence wasn't as successful at convincing loyalists who had concrete opinions of the tyrannical nature of the mob.
Sure, I mean, the character I played in the Revolution in New York City was a non-voter, but I was able to get her voice heard by joining mobs and getting decisions made. Unfortunately, I think that violence was necessary in some revolutions, since it made the opposing side succumb to their demands.
I agree. Violence is a good way to push an agenda forward. Getting members of Congress injured so they can't vote or a king executed so they can't rule definitely helps the other side.
Yes, but to clarify, I believe that the passion and drive for radical change can sometimes be mistaken for the need to act out in radical violence. When this happens, the violent acts diminish the credibility of the revolution. They may solidify the beliefs of the mob and those engaging in the acts, but from the other side, progress cannot occur when change happens without order.
Although violence can lead to political change, in the French Revolution, the large number of the Third Estate was especially beneficial because their violence could have a huge impact. For example, the peasant women rioted outside the Palace of Versailles and demanded that Marie Antoinette and King Louis XVI come back to Paris with them. This led to the fall of the monarchy and hence led to political change.
In our game, the violence in the form of riots by the section leaders influenced the entire direction of the National Assembly. At one point, specifically during the last game session, the riots were the focal point, and this led to a mass destruction of the French population.
Couldn't have said it better.
Well, I really enjoyed this discussion. I think we hit on a lot of important ideas, especially the fact that the main reason for revolution stems from the need to be heard and represented by the government.
Yes, and that philosophers and literary works provide an outside perspective for the suppressed to revolt.
And also, violence does in fact play a role in forcing opposition to do something.
All true. Well, that was it for our discussion on legitimate ways for affecting political change. I hope you enjoyed the show.
Before we go, be sure to follow us on social media. Links are on our website. And also be sure to check us out on Patreon.
Bye.
Malgré les mutins, tout réussira.